Eldarien and Rorlane make camp under the canopy of stars, the sky unobstructed above them, except for that part hidden by the mountains rising ever higher in the west, snow-capped but now a dull mass of black against the speckled firmament. They have travelled 4 days across the highlands now, walking for most of the day, with only 1 or 2 stops for rest and food. At night, they find the most sheltered places that they can amid the wide expanse of the land, which is barren except for scattered boulders, a littering of a few trees, birch and alder, and clefts in the earth through which run crevices or from which rise cliffs of dirt and stone, 5, 10, sometimes 15 feet high, only just as quickly to merge back into the flat and formless earth once again. It is as if the land was scarred in times long past by a great earthquake, or by torrents of water cutting their way rapidly across the land, tearing long scars into the earth, or pushing up banks of higher ground from the uniform surface. But whatever processes formed this long stretch of land under the shadow of the high peaks of the Telmerion range to the west, and yet looking down on the hills and forest to the east as they make their way to the sea, no one now remembers. The Eldarien highlands are like a great shelf of land jutting eastward out of the feet of the mountains, a shelf that has broken into pieces and is creased, as if a piece of cloth were pushed simultaneously from both ends and became wrinkled by the force exerted upon it. The night is cold, but not as cold as it has been so far in their journey, and they sit around a small fire which crackles and sputters as it consumes the minimal amount of fuel they could find among the grasses and sparse trees of the highlands. Without tent or shelter, they have been sleeping with nothing but fur bedrolls to keep out the elements. But until now this has not been a problem, as not even a rain has come since they left the woods. The weather has been fair, a true onset of spring, however delayed. Yet as much as the pleasantness of the weather encourages them, they know that much of this warmth will be forfeit when they approach the foothills of the mountains. The numerous little springs that trickle down from the mountains, gurgling among the rocks, witness to the snows, some melting with the change in weather, and yet many remaining unchanged even into the warmer parts of the year. Their water is icy cold, and the 2 men use it to refill their waterskins, to bathe and to cook. But now, with a stream not far away singing softly in the night, they sit together near the fire, its vivid light upon their faces and casting heavy shadows all about them.
I am still struggling to understand,
Rorlane begins,
what exactly you hope to find in Serra Galaptes. Shall we just fight against any of these creatures should we happen upon them? And if so, what good does that do for us?
I was hoping, rather, to find whatever may be disturbing their rest.
It seems like a frail hope and a weak expectation.
I grant as much.
Eldarien says.
I have not much hope, but I know not where else to turn. If anything, we will have ruled out one avenue and will be able to direct our steps upon another.
Understood,
Rorlane affirms.
I don't have any better suggestions.
It should be, I think, another 4 or 5 days until we reach the foothills.
Eldarien says, changing the subject.
But even then, if my understanding of the landscape serves me correct, we will need to skirt around the base of the range. Much more feasible than trying to climb it, if we are to draw near to Falstead and Serra Galaptes behind it. It is nestled quite deep between the mountains in a natural basin, so I expect another 1.5 weeks of travel, perhaps more depending on the speed of our progress.
I want to thank you again,
Rorlane begins unexpectedly,
for accepting me upon your journey.
I am the one who should thank you,
replies Eldarien.
As I have said before, I lead you into danger, perhaps unto death.
You also led me out of a place of death, so I shall follow you to whatever end.
I wish you would follow another.
Eldarien sighs.
I have led many men into danger and death, both their own and that of others.
Rorlane looks at him with questioning eyes, but does not speak, as if afraid to force anything that Eldarien does not wish. But the latter volunteers the information freely.
If you are to travel with me, It is only just that you know the path I have taken to this place.
And he explains to Rorlane his former role in the Imperial army and the circumstances leading to his return to Telmerion. He does not hide either the fact that, in the name of the Empire, he had acted unjustly.
The path that I walk now is seeking to set right in some manner the ills that I myself have either perpetrated or ignored, and to discover some way that I may be of aid to our hurting people.
Looking deep into Rorlane's eyes, he adds,
I understand if this changes the way that you see me.
If it changes anything,
Rorlane replies immediately,
it only deepens my respect for you and my trust in the integrity of your heart. Thank you for speaking so openly with me.
Perhaps I should have done so from the beginning.
I understand why you waited, and I am content.
Rorlane says with a sober smile.
In fact, there is something I should perhaps have told you about as well. At any rate, it would be wrong of me now to hide it, hearing what you have told me.
Eldarien waits silently for Rorlane to continue, which he does shortly.
I, too, come from warfare, though I was not in nearly as close proximity with it as you were. Perhaps Father told you that I was away from home for a few years?
I think he mentioned it offhandedly at one point.
During that time, I travelled to Minstead and sought to join up with the rebellion.
Seeing Eldarien's expression, he laughs softly and adds,
Worry not. We are not enemies, not in any way.
Clearly,
Eldarien says,
I am no longer fighting for the Empire.
But you still have your oath.
That I do.
Eldarien sighs and pauses in thought for a moment before adding,
But I know not what it means to be faithful to that oath under current circumstances. Is that why we are not enemies? You think I will side with the rebellion?
No, that is not it at all.
Rorlane exclaims, raising his hands as if in protestation.
I am sided with neither the Empire nor the rebellion. I think we are much alike, Eldarien, not only in our experience but in our heart's purpose, for we both side with Telmerion and her people.
You speak truly.
Eldarien agrees.
And I can speak from the other side of the field of battle, if such an expression be allowed.
Rorlane continues,
The night grows late, but I will share much more with you soon, as not only do you deserve to know everything, and it may help to guide us in our journey, but also because I want you to know. There can be no secrets between us, particularly not of a nature that could sever us from one another, from a sole intent toward a single goal. Indeed, not only a single goal, but a unified path to that goal.
You speak with wisdom.
Eldarien says,
And I will look forward to hearing more of your story soon. But you have already well gained my trust, so I fear not the time of waiting.
Thank you.
says Rorlane with a bow of the head.
And I hope that when you hear what I have to say, that trust will only deepen. No, not trust. What I mean is rather that our vision may align more and more in insight and intent, and thus our paths converge, as our hearts have first been intertwined.
Eldarien laughs softly at this, not in humour or mockery, but in gratitude and delight, and says,
Truly the crossing of our paths has been arranged by a vision much greater than our own, and is a boon far beyond my hope or expectation.
After this, they speak little more before retiring for the night, and depart not long after sunrise the next morning. By the end of the following day, the land begins to rise gradually, and the rocky creases in the earth increase in number and depth. Soon they find it necessary to navigate their way around the rifts in the earth, either scaling the cliffs or walking around them upon whatever grassy turf or level stone they can find, and this slows their progress. Eldarien begins to lead them further to the south, but still toward the mountains in a southwesterly direction, though even this, because of the terrain, often becomes straight south or straight west, depending on need. At last, after 5 days of travel, they come near to the feet of the mountains, with rocky slopes rising quickly ahead of them, with grasses and various trees growing from the rifts on the stone, like streaks or veins of colour and life in the hard and colourless face. Here they turn directly south and follow along the line of the mountains, which, after passing around the base of a great cliff which rises above them to a snowy peak clothed in mist and cloud, begins to curve gradually southwestward.
It is not far now.
Eldarien remarks.
We will be entering Gyla's Basin within a day or two.
In the late morning of the second day after this remark, the two men stand in the midst of a wide span of land that rises on either side of them, up to mountains on both their right and their left. The trees have returned too, and as they progress, the barren land is replaced by thick foliage and eventually by a dense wood. Here, despite the altitude, a great variety of vegetation thrives, ferns, carpets of avens and tussocks of saxifrage along the floor of the forest, and trees of aspen and spruce and towering pines reaching up to the sky and creating a lush canopy overhead. Through this canopy, and among the massive trunks of the trees, which stand like sentinels of the ages, light shines in visible rays. The light is made almost tangible, as it were, within the mist that blankets the basin, a glowing white sheet that dampens their clothing and their hair as they progress. A couple days later, in the early evening, they draw near to Falstead. Cresting a small hillock, they find themselves looking down upon the skeleton of the village, the structures of buildings long slumbering and now garmented in moss and vines and interspersed with young trees, all the while engulfed on all sides by the wider forest that closed the basin from mountain to mountain. Eldarien pauses and draws in a deep breath, allowing his eyes to scan the village which is laid before their eyes in its entirety. R'hllane takes a step back and remains silent.
Almost 20 years.
Eldarien says at last.
It has been almost 20 years since I was here.
His heart aches, and he tries to stifle the memories that threaten to engulf him if he allows them to spread. They must come, he knows, but not here, not now. Let them at least enter the village and find what they shall find. Let them at least make camp somewhere first, and then he will feel what he must feel and think what he must think. He turns to R'hllane.
Well, shall we go?
Upon your word.
Then let us descend. It looks deserted, so it may serve well also as a shelter for the night.
They pick their way among the trees and foliage down from the hillock until the land flattens beneath them and the first buildings of the village appear around them. Few are left untouched by fire, and most are hardly more than the rubble of a few remaining posts, perhaps a chimney standing alone in a pile of burned wood or a doorway with no door and no interior to protect.
I am surprised,
R'hllane says softly, as they walk among the ruins, an overgrown stone path now beneath their feet,
that this place has not since been inhabited.
The Relihim have their own way of life.
Eldarien replies,
and it seldom involves living in one place for long. No, having a stable village would not be their way. They could have taken it if they wished, but it seems it was enough for them simply to destroy.
Those who are destroyed cannot fight back,
R'hllane says.
Yes, and if there is no village left, it is not likely that others will come to occupy it.
Even in its shattered state, Eldarien recognizes the village of his youth, and before his mind's eye, the ruined buildings are, as it were, again made whole. On its abandoned streets walk again the humble and beautiful people among whom he grew and learned, and whom he had loved so simply and naively. He sees Siot, the blacksmith, pounding away with a hammer in the heat of the forge, sweat on his face and a gleam in his eyes, looking up and smiling as Eldarien walks past. He sees Farah and her husband, Coman, sitting on a log bench in front of their house, while their 3 children play along the path, Tulka, Halia and Kirk. Unconsciously, Eldarien steps out of the way, so as not to interfere with the children's play. As they move further into the village, Eldarien raises his eyes and sees the town square before them, a circle of cobbled stone with a statue in the middle, a statue now torn down and cast to the earth, with thick vines interweaving across it and the pedestal alone remaining standing. Here Eldarien kneels down and begins to pull away the clinging vines.
"Can you help me?"
he asks, turning his gaze to Rorlain.
Of course.
When the vines have been removed, the two men look down upon the fractured figure of an ancient king, a crown upon his brow and a sword in his hands, elegant armor against his breast and a cape upon his back.
"Sera Galaptis,"
whispers Eldarien, and then adds, with a gesture to the pedestal,
"The inscription is there in ancient runes."
Was this his seat of government?
Rorlain asks.
"Oh no, he lived higher in the mountains in a city of stone which has long lain in ruin. It is said that dragons came from the north, from the highest peaks, stirred to jealousy by the achievements of men. That, along with the wars of humankind, brought an end to the line of the once glorious Galaptea kings, and so ended the most noble kingship that the world has known, one blessed by the divines themselves."
Eldarien pauses and sighs before rising to his feet.
"But now what is it? Dust and ashes."
The memory has been all but forgotten.
Rorlain says.
It is surprising that you recall so much.
"It is deep in the memory of our people."
Eldarien answers.
Or it was. I am the last remaining of my kin. Few Galaptea still live in whose veins flows the blood of the first founders of our clan.
Your clan?
Rorlain asks.
But the Galaptea ruled before the clans were even born, in the ages before Telmerion became what it is today, or what it was even in the centuries of warfare.
Such history is shrouded in darkness, and we know very little. The Galaptea were also caught deeply in the inter-clan wars that ravaged the land. Like so many others, our history is marked with unjust blood.
With this, Eldarien bends down toward the statue and says,
"Help me lift it?"
We can try.
Together, the two men are able to raise the fallen statue from the ground and to place it again upon its pedestal.
"Even though they have departed, the dead deserve our respect."
Eldarien says, and Rorlain knows that he speaks of more than just the statue of the ancient king.
"I would like,"
begins Eldarien after a long moment of silence,
"to be alone for a while. Would that be all right?"
It is only fitting.
Rorlain answers.
I will have a look around myself and perhaps find a good place to set up camp.
"I will find you soon enough."
Of course, take your time.
With this, Eldarien turns away and continues along the path, letting the memories return and wash over him again. If he had avoided recalling the early years of his life until this point, now that he finds himself here again, the longing stirs within him to return to it, to call it all to mind, to reverence and remember and abide. Is it not this longing which drew him here in the first place, which led him to come here, to enter the village, when he could have easily passed by on the way to the barrow?
"I know that I cannot move forward, unless I am willing to look back."
He thinks to himself, and he feels the desire stir within him to cast an anchor over the recent years of his life, years of bloodshed and war, to the purity and simplicity of his youth. If only it were possible to recapture it, even in small measure. With these thoughts, he raises his eyes and sees the remains of Aidan's house, now an empty and hollow shell. This man, his tutor and guide, had truly been as a second father to him from his earliest days. He recalls his face and his form now, with the eyes of his heart, and finds himself transported in memory back into the past. Aidan's reddish-brown hair, thick and pulled back into a ponytail, dances in the breeze, with a few loose strands blowing in front of his face. Brushing these aside, he says,
"One more time, my son."
It is his usual manner of expression, though Eldarien is not his son. It feels fitting for both of them, a title of tenderness and affection, which in no way lessens the bond between Eldarien and Ierendal, his father by blood. It is a joyful agreement between them that they both love and care for the boy, with one fruit only, that he himself feels by it doubly blessed.
I'll get you this time,
Young Eldarien says, raising his wooden sword in front of his body and planting his feet firmly in the ground.
Will you now?
Responds Aiden with a smile. He too raises his practice sword and waits for the younger to initiate. They engage for a few swings, Aiden parrying Eldarien's strikes and yet being blocked in turn, until Eldarien succeeds in breaching his tutor's defenses and laying a blow against his chest.
The match is yours,
Aiden says, raising his hands in the air in a gesture of surrender.
You gave me an opening,
Eldarien cries.
Yes, but you took it. This shows that you are learning.
but I want to beat you fairly.
You did beat me fairly.
I mean, I want to beat you when you are trying your best.
I expect that someday you will.
Aiden looks at Eldarien with a mysterious glimmer in his eyes, and then says,
What say you to a little walk?
In the woods.
Aye, and upward.
Upward?
Just a little ways until you can see the whole village laid out before your eyes.
What are we waiting for? Let's go.
And so they walk up through the woods, through the dense trees and undergrowth, as the ground gradually rises under their feet. Before long, they come to a wide shelf of stone cutting out of the earth, like a rift from the mountain jutting into the basin of land in which Falstead lies. Aiden leads Eldarien around its base, and then helps him climb up onto the stone at the lowest spot.
Come, we are almost there,
Aiden says, gesturing for Eldarien to follow. He leads him along the top of the shelf, which rises quickly to their right, until the stone itself stands above the trees, reaching out like some great finger of the earth pointing toward the sky.
Here we are. Look.
Eldarien turns and gazes out in the direction in which Aiden waves his hand and exclaims softly,
Wow.
The entire tree line between them and the village is laid beneath their gaze, the tops of the trees swaying gently in the breeze and their leaves rustling softly like water. In the distance from which they came, the houses of Falstead are visible, their wood or thatched roofs glowing in the sun and smoke rising in spirals from many chimneys. From this vantage point, Eldarien can see the shape of the village and the layout of its paths, practical and yet elegant, a single main road down the middle with 3 branches on either side, almost like an 8-pointed star.
Someday you're going to leave this village, Eldarien.
Aiden begins, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder.
And I want you to remember what I have taught you. I don't mean the swordplay techniques, but the honor, the fidelity, humility, and spirit of service.
He looks at Eldarien, and the glimmer in his eyes turns into an ocean of tenderness, a torrent of love.
Man is very small, and yet also very great. In this lies the mystery of every human life, your own as well as mine.
The memory fades, and Eldarien finds himself standing on the overgrown path, the ruins of Aiden's house before him, and tears in his eyes. He remains looking for a while longer, unable to move, as the grief washes over him, hesitant to leave this place behind, to say a final farewell to his mentor, but also to come to the home of his family, in which a 3-fold mourning awaits him. But he does so, forcing his feet along the path and gradually approaching the house. And yet he stops short, 30 or so yards before it, at the place where the last words of his father were spoken and his life so violently taken. The images flash before his mind, and yet they mingle with other images, unbidden, which arise before him, of the blood that he too has spilled, of the death that his own blade has inflicted. The two images merge in his mind's eye, and for a moment it is as if the two acts of murder are inseparable, identical, the butchery of his father at the hand of the lawless brigands, and the deaths inflicted by Eldarien's own sword at the command of his superiors, as an arm of the Empire's might. At this, nausea overtakes him, and he must restrain himself to keep from vomiting. He tries to think through what he is experiencing, but his mind is overwhelmed, and the images of violence, all blurred together, suffocate him, and with them a stinging feeling of shame and loss. Loss not only of family, of friends, but loss of innocence, loss of being unconditionally on the side of goodness. He had assumed as a child and as a young man, rightly or wrongly, that he was sided with goodness, that his intentions and his acts were unquestionably good, or at least striving toward the good. It is not that he took pride in his acts, or in what he understood of his heart's desires, but he did take consolation in them. Yet that is all gone now, and as he stands at the place where his father died, he sees his own heart divided, torn between good and evil, between light and darkness, aspiring towards goodness and yet falling short, seduced by darkness and making excuses either out of fear or convenience, or the blindness that clouds every human heart. Despite his best intentions, he has fallen immeasurably short of his deepest desires and indeed stained his hands with blood and his heart with evil. How now can he ever hope to stand on the side of goodness and light once again? How can a man who has chosen darkness ever be light or stand for the light? Surely such a thing is not even possible. As his heart is divided, tormented by these thoughts and feelings, another voice breaks through, only for a moment, only for a flash, and yet its effect lingers within him.
Lightborn.
The name carries within it all that Hyliana had spoken to him, all the words of light and love and encouragement, and they pour into him a current of hope that collides with the ocean of shame and despair that threatens to overtake him. He tries to lean into the current, to grasp for some semblance of light, but he finds nothing within himself, nothing that is not sullied by evil. Then he turns beyond himself, as if reaching out with the hands of his heart to the light that lies beyond the darkness, and in this moment realizes that his very reaching out is light, is goodness, however weak, however fragile. Light reaching unto light. In this, a flame begins to burn in his heart again, his own and yet not his own, beyond him and yet within him, which he can never claim as his own, and yet which has been entrusted to him as his most intimate truth. He begins to think, and then falters, overcome by a surge of emotion, a depth of feeling that contains within it, as it were, all that he has felt throughout his life, commingled together and made one. The words form within his mind now, even though they are more than words, or words containing more than they are, a deep certainty inscribed upon the heart.
I am not the light, and yet I am chosen by the light, born of the light. In this alone lies my hope of standing for the light, yes, of becoming light.
After this, the experience gradually fades, though lingering with him, as if taking up residence somewhere deep within the recesses of his being. Raising his eyes, he looks about him, the rays of the setting sun now bathing the village in light, painting the air and the ruins and the trees and the sky with shades of purple and pink. He draws in breath and takes a step forward, and then another, and gaining courage, comes at last to his childhood home. There are no walls, no door, and yet he does not stand outside looking. Rather, this time, he enters the building, or what remains of it, with the shadow of its form still visible upon the ground. Looking around, he sees that nothing is left to distinguish his family home from any other, not a single heirloom or memento. The house was clearly gutted and then burned, and nothing remains now but rubble, foundation, and a stone hearth standing like a lonely sentinel over the place where his family used to gather in love and security. But he knows where his mother had lain the last time that he saw her in the flesh, already passed on beyond the boundary of death, but her bodily form before him. He recalls her again, as if to say a final goodbye, and then kneels before where she had lain, placing his forehead against the ground and closing his eyes, letting the love of his heart, so long buried and yet burning, always in vigil deep within, spring forth and speak to her in the language beyond words.